For this month's route report, Lindsay and I wanted to talk about our process of making a field plan. So a field plan literally just lays out where your crops are going to go in which field. It's very important so that you know what sort of yields to expect, when and where to plant things, and so that you have a good history so that you know where to rotate your crops to in future years. So what we're looking at right here is a picture of Root Mass Farm in 2010. This is our house up here, our greenhouse, and these are the very first fields that Lindsay and I planted. In this picture, it's cover cropped with buckwheat. That was put down in 2010 as kind of a first crop to control the weeds in the future years to make it a little easier on ourselves when we actually planted it in 2011. You can see that this field has a little bit of a funny shape. That's because there's actually a little asparagus patch that our landlords put in a number of years ago. It hasn't yielded too much yet, but we're hoping if we keep weeding it, we'll get something out of it. And then last year in 2011, we also tilled in a field out in this former cow pasture for the first time. This will more than double our growing space for 2012. It runs from about there all the way down here. You can see it's quite big, especially considering what we were working with last year. And then we are also going to be tilling in another section to bring into cultivation eventually in 2013, right next to it. And also hopefully adding a nice little berry patch right along this wooded edge here. So I just wanted to show you what our farm looks like and give you a sense of the size and placement of the fields that I'll be talking about. Next we'll take a look at the documents we use to actually fill in where our crops are going to go. So this is just a normal spreadsheet, but we've laid it all out to kind of look like the first field that Lindsay and I planted in 2011. We're looking at it from a slightly different angle, but here's that asparagus patch I was talking about, and the two fields that Lindsay and I planted. These are all just empty rows here. Each one of these represents about 6 feet. That's a 2-foot footpath and a 4-foot wide bed. So we literally just measured the distance of the field we had plowed, and then we could kind of figure out how many rows we could actually get in there, and hope that I actually drove the tractor straight enough to get all those beds. Next we'll take a look at our actual 2011 field plan. So this is our 2011 field plan. You can see we grew a lot of different crops all over these fields. The items listed first were the first crops to go in the ground, and then if you see the items in parentheses, like these ones up here, that is actually, we flipped the beds over and planted a second crop in them later. We did quite a bit of that this first year because we were working on such a tight amount of space. You can see this field over here. We can zoom in a little bit too so you can get a better sense of that. This field is a bunch of kind of summertime crops and very large crops. We purposely put them over in that side field over there because we knew that field was a little bit wetter and a little bit weedier, and we wanted to grow crops that we could put in the ground a little bit later and would kind of take care of the weeds on their own by crowding them out. So we got a lot of big plants like tomatoes, sweet potatoes, squash, all those sorts of things. That's the squash is in here where it says Three Sisters. We grew corn, beans, and squash all together. So just wanted to give you a sense of kind of where we position things and why in 2011. The other thing to note is that we based kind of the number of bed feet largely on my experiences of selling in the past and how much we thought we could reasonably expect to sell of each of these things in our first year. Next we'll take a look at our 2012 field plan, which was based on kind of where we put things last year and also how much of those things we sold. So we'll take a look at that next. So this is our 2012 field plan. I can point out a few small differences. This again is just this near field that Lindsay and I planted for the first time last year. You can see we have X's up here in what was formerly a bed. Turned out to be a little too close to the fence line, so Lindsay and I decided to get rid of that bed for this year. We also added a couple of new beds up here, and up here. These are all uphill and a little bit drier, so they should be easier to plant in the spring. Last year was a particularly wet year, but we don't want to risk that again, so we did add a couple of just small beds so we could get some early spring crops in. We can take another look at this side field over here. This was the one I was saying was wet before, and so we grew a lot of kind of large summer crops in. Hopefully there won't be as many weeds, but we're putting all fall crops in there this year, and that's again because we want the field to dry out before we start running over it with the tractor, so we don't want to be plowing it in the early spring. We'll wait till the summer, and then we'll put those fall crops in the summer. Now let me take you over to a picture of our new field. This one here. I'll make that a little bit bigger for you to see. So you can see that this isn't to the same scale as the other one, but we ended up putting a lot of the same crops that we put in that side field last year over here, and again that's because they tend to be bigger crops that compete better with weeds. This being a new field, we know will be a little bit weedier, so we wanted to put those things in there, things that can take care of themselves a little bit better than some of the other crops, things like carrots and onions, which don't compete very well with weeds. We also this field is pretty large, and so we're really increasing the quantities of those things which were formerly just on the side field, and that's based a lot on what we sold this past year. In particular, we sold a lot of tomatoes, so we only had about 250 bed feet of tomatoes last year. This year, this is one 400-foot bed, and we also had another 200-foot bed in the other field. And we also sold out of winter squash really early. We sold out of sweet potatoes really early, so we wanted to give those crops some more space so that we'll have more of them for the upcoming year. Down here, this is the field that I was saying we're going to bring into cultivation in 2013. We'll till it in this spring, and we will be planting it with cowpeas, which will add a lot of nitrogen and carbon to the ground so that it should be in better shape to plant next year. And then, again, in parentheses, we'll be putting in a second cover crop of tillage radishes and oats. That will help improve the drainage for next year and should leave it nice and bare for when we want to plant it in the following spring. So that's how we go about planting our fields. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks a lot.